In 2045, Mars had no sound, until a single ringtone echoed across the dunes. A tone from another age, light and warm against the cold red silence, cut through the dust-laden air like an impossible memory. The storms outside the colony walls had raged for 3 days straight, turning solar panels into useless slabs buried in grit. Every system that depended on the network had died, one by one, in the wake of the solar flare. The colony's primary communication array was gone. Backup relays fried. The emergency beacon? Nothing but a silent tower under a blood-orange sky. What was left was oxygen for less than 2 days, one stranded engineer, and a dead planet stretching endlessly in every direction. He had already torn apart every storage locker in the auxiliary bay, desperate for anything that could be used to repair even one link to Earth. He found scraps of wiring, cracked lenses, old maintenance drones that wouldn't even power on. Then, buried under a tangle of vacuum-sealed blankets and surplus tools, he pulled out a thin, black rectangle, lighter than memory and coated in fine Martian dust. It was a Realme one, an artifact from the late 2010s, brought here years ago by a technician who claimed it was just for music. The engineer almost laughed. It didn't belong here, in the most advanced human outpost ever built beyond Earth. Yet here it was, stubbornly intact, the old lithium battery still holding a charge after all these years. When he powered it on, the startup chime felt impossibly out of place in the sterile hum of the backup oxygen compressor. The screen came to life, showing a wallpaper of some old Earth city, washed in sunset. There was no network, no SIM card, but the offline storage was full. Songs, photos, crude old apps from an era when AI was still a novelty. And then something stranger. A folder buried deep in the system, labeled only with a string of numbers. Inside were coordinates. Not Earth coordinates, not lunar, not even matching Mars' existing mapping grid. The file size was small, but the pattern repeated itself across dozens of entries, as though they were part of a larger sequence. He didn't have time to wonder why. The Realme's GPS function, primitive by modern standards, still pulled readings from the colony's internal positioning system. He tried mapping one of the coordinates to Mars' surface grid, expecting nonsense. Instead, the point resolved into a location, 32 kilometers east of Ares Outpost 3, in a sector officially listed as barren and unsafe due to magnetic field anomalies. He stared at the map, brow furrowing behind his helmet's visor. The colony's last expedition in that direction had reported faulty readings, compasses spinning, drones losing navigation mid-flight. The official recommendation was to avoid it entirely. And yet, this ancient phone seemed perfectly confident about where it was. He considered the absurdity. The colony's advanced equipment was fried, but this relic, designed before Mars colonization was even a plan, was working flawlessly. He couldn't explain it. Maybe its shielding was primitive enough to ignore the solar flare's radiation patterns. Maybe the lack of sophisticated sensors made it immune to whatever anomaly existed out there. Whatever the reason, it was the only device still pointing toward something other than certain death. As he turned the phone in his gloved hands, the screen flickered. Not the usual battery warning, but something else, an incoming call. The contact ID was blank, the icon a simple pulse of light. His breath caught. This was impossible. There was no relay left between Mars and anything else in the solar system. He let it ring once, twice, the sound echoing faintly in the empty habitat, until instinct overrode logic and he accepted the call. There was no voice at first, only static, low and deliberate, as though carrying weight. Then came a sound, 3 tones in sequence, like an alien version of a knock on a door. His mind raced through possibilities. Automated beacon, corrupted signal, hallucination born of stress and oxygen deprivation. But then the tones repeated, slower this time, and his eyes darted to the GPS display. The coordinates had shifted slightly, as though the sender wanted him to move. He felt the cold pull of curiosity, the dangerous kind that had driven humans into every dark ocean, every high peak, and now onto this dead world. He didn't know who or what was calling. But something out there was alive enough to reach him, and that meant there was still a chance. When the call ended, the phone saved the transmission automatically. The playback showed no data that matched any human protocol. Whatever it was, it hadn't come from Earth. Not from the colony. Not from any known satellite in Mars' orbit. He looked at the map again, the new coordinates glowing faintly against the red terrain. They pointed deeper into the anomaly zone, right to the place no one had dared to go since landing. In the quiet that followed, the engineer realized he was smiling. It wasn't joy, exactly. It was the thrill of knowing that something had broken the rules. And humans, if nothing else, had always been very good at breaking rules back. He slipped the Realme 1 into a chest pocket, sealed his helmet, and keyed the airlock. Outside, the storm still howled, but the phone's faint glow pulsed against his suit like a heartbeat, a reminder that somewhere beyond the red horizon, someone, or something, was waiting. And on Mars, waiting was never just waiting. It was an invitation. The Realme 1's display burned faintly against the dim light inside his visor, the new coordinates etched in sharp clarity. He began moving, each step a slow grind against the thin Martian soil, guided entirely by the old phone's navigation. The signal pulsed at regular intervals, a faint vibration in his palm each time he closed another kilometer. There was no other equipment left to compare readings, no AI interface, no drone scout, just his own instincts and a device built in an era when phones were barely more than pocket computers. The strangeness of it gnawed at him. This was supposed to be a useless relic, yet it was behaving as if designed for this world. The static he'd recorded from the call looped in his memory. It wasn't random. The pattern was too deliberate. Back in the habitat, he had run the sound through the phone's primitive translation app, expecting nothing. Instead, the waveform had matched a set of compressed phonemes, syllables not belonging to any human language, yet possessing structure, cadence, and intent. His fingers had hovered over the translate button before he tapped it, half expecting gibberish. What emerged was a simple phrase: "Help us." No name, no explanation, just the urgency of survival. That, at least, he understood. Humans didn't need the whole story to act, they just needed to know someone was in danger. But the part that unsettled him most was the implication that whoever had sent the message knew he could hear it. And more than that, they'd chosen an antique human device to make contact. He pressed on into the storm. Dust whipped in long, unbroken streams, blurring the horizon into a single wall of ochre. The phone's compass remained steady, untouched by the interference that would have scrambled modern navigation systems. He began to wonder if this was why the signal hadn't gone to the colony's main array, why it had come to him instead. The Realme 1 was, in its way, invisible to the environmental chaos around it. The coordinates led him toward a region where the ground shifted in color, a darker rust laced with streaks of black stone. Magnetic readings spiked wildly on his suit's basic meter, then flatlined, as if the instruments simply gave up. But the phone kept guiding him, unbothered, unhesitating. Then the signal pattern changed. The vibration became irregular, quick bursts between long pauses, drawing his attention to a growing silhouette in the haze. Through the storm, a glint of light flickered, a reflection low to the ground, too precise to be a rock. He slowed, lifting the phone, and switched on its flashlight. The thin beam cut through the dust like a blade, bright and unwavering, landing squarely on the shape ahead. The response was immediate. Another light flared back, not steady, but pulsing in a pattern that echoed the original three-tone chime he'd heard in the call. He recognized it instantly. Whoever was out there had been waiting for this recognition, for this exact method of reply. He angled the phone's light, replying in the same rhythm, a crude form of visual Morse. The alien sender's response was faster now, urgent, closing the distance. When they emerged from the storm, his breath caught. They weren't human, taller, limbs jointed in ways that seemed engineered for a lighter world, skin reflecting the beam in smooth metallic ripples. Their gear was battered, scorched along the edges, some parts patched together from materials that didn't match. He could see no mouth, no eyes, but the way they tilted their head toward him conveyed clear intent. A voice, not through the air, but directly into his suit's comms, spoke in halting, broken synthesis. Primitive device, survive storm? It wasn't a question so much as disbelief. He didn't answer right away. They were watching him, as if expecting something only a human would do. And he did. He smiled again, though they couldn't see it. It's not primitive, he said. It's dependable. The alien shifted, the faint pulse of light from their equipment dimming. They gestured toward a jagged ridge to the east, where the storm seemed thicker, almost vibrating in place. Crash site, the voice said. Asterisk need help. You help, we fix air. Asterisk the word stumbled, but the meaning was crystalline. They could repair the oxygen system at the colony if he assisted them in recovering something from their wreck. There was no hesitation. The phone went into his outer pocket, the screen still glowing faintly with the map. He followed, the alien leading the way with movements that seemed both graceful and wary, like someone who understood the planet's dangers far too well. Whatever they needed from the wreck, it was important enough to risk revealing themselves to a human. The closer they drew, the more his own pulse began to match the phone's faint rhythm, each vibration a reminder that this was no accident. Something, or someone, had decided a lone human, armed with nothing but an outdated phone and stubborn persistence, was worth trusting in the middle of Mars' deadliest storm. And he intended to prove them right. The wreck loomed ahead like a fractured monument, half buried in the red dust, its surfaces twisted into unfamiliar geometry. Whatever had brought it down had ripped through layers of alloy unlike anything human engineers used, leaving scars that still shimmered faintly as if cooling from a heat far greater than any atmospheric entry could produce. The alien moved with practiced speed, hands working over panels and seams, searching for something specific. He stayed close, scanning the site, the Realme 1 casting its narrow beam into crevices and shadows. It seemed absurd that his outdated flashlight was the brightest, most reliable source of light here, but the alien didn't question it. The voice came again, more coherent now as it synced with his suit's processors. Asterisk need beacon core. Without it, no signal to fleet. Without signal, no rescue. Asterisk the words carried no plea, only statement. The situation was as sharp as any survival equation. Recover their technology, secure their rescue, and in return, save the colony's failing oxygen system. He asked what the beacon core looked like, and instead of explaining, the alien gestured toward a compartment blocked by a slab of fused metal. Their own tools sparked uselessly against it, energy dispersing into the wreckage as if the material absorbed it. He stepped forward, considering options. The Realme 1 was no tool for cutting metal, but it had something the alien tech didn't, an audio jack. He dug into his kit, pulling a length of insulated wire salvaged from the colony's fried systems. The alien tilted their head, observing as he stripped the ends, connected one to the phone's port, and clipped the other to the exposed circuitry along the wreck's seam. It was crude, risky, but he knew what he was doing. The Realme's simple hardware bypassed all the safety protocols modern devices enforced, allowing him to dump a controlled pulse of stored energy directly into the alien panel. The reaction was instant. The fused metal cracked with a sound like snapping stone, and the panel shifted enough to be pried open. The alien froze for a moment, their head angling sharply toward the phone. Your device, not follow protocol. It was not an accusation, but a kind of astonished recognition. He shrugged. We don't always follow rules. That's how we stay alive. Inside the compartment, the beacon core sat like a glass heart, glowing faintly from within. The alien lifted it carefully, their hands steady despite the storm's vibration underfoot. They glanced back at him, and though their face revealed nothing, the pause carried meaning. We will fix your air, they said simply. The return journey was faster, the alien cutting a direct path toward a ridge where a narrow cave opened into the Martian rock. Inside, their equipment was already laid out, a scattering of curved instruments, fluid-filled conduits, and modules whose function he could only guess. The oxygen recycler from his colony's backup system sat in the center, clearly taken from one of their earlier scavenging trips. It had been stripped down to its frame, but in the alien's hands, pieces moved into place with speed and precision. He watched as they spliced in components from their own tech, sealing gaps with a resin that hardened instantly under a pale blue light. When the work was done, the unit's indicator flared green for the first time in days. Oxygen output, steady, clean, and sustainable, flowed through the test valves. The aliens stepped back, their posture straightening. Trade complete. The words were formal, but something in their tone carried the weight of more than an exchange of survival tools. He could have left it there, taken the recycler and walked away, but instead, he handed the Realme one to them. "You might need this," he said. They turned it over in their hands, tracing its edges. Old, but strong. The way they said it made it sound like a description of him, as much as the device. They passed it back. "You keep. Your way's different. Useful, As they escorted him out toward clearer air, he realized the trade had been more than physical. In the process of solving each other's problems, they had each learned something neither side could have planned for. They had seen the value of methods outside their own designs, the kind of adaptability that couldn't be engineered into a blueprint. By the time the colony's lights shimmered faintly through the thinning storm, the alien ship was no longer visible behind them. The beacon core was gone, destined to call in a rescue far from human eyes, but the oxygen system at Ares Outpost 3 was alive again. And in his pocket, the Realme 1 vibrated once, faintly, as if acknowledging that the bargain had been kept. The storm had thinned to a soft veil when he reached the colony gates, the oxygen recycler humming with renewed strength on his back. Inside, the stale air gave way to a steady, breathable flow, the indicators glowing a calm green that felt like a heartbeat restored. For the first time in days, the constant weight of survival eased just enough for him to notice the quiet. He set the Realme 1 on the workbench beside the recycler, meaning to shut it off, but the screen lit before he could touch it. The glow was different this time, brighter, sharper, accompanied by a new icon pulsing in the corner. A message was waiting. Not in text, not in voice, but in a crystalline projection of symbols that rotated slowly in the air above the screen. He recognized some of the shapes from the aliens' equipment, but others were new, carrying a rhythm in their sequence that suggested urgency. The phone's translator app, still running in the background, began piecing them together into words. "For your survival, you will need this." The Realme 1's simple chassis opened slightly, revealing a wafer-thin plate of unfamiliar material fused to its inner circuit. It looked like nothing that belonged to any human device, smooth, flawless, and faintly warm to the touch. When he powered the phone again, the interface had changed. The maps no longer stopped at Mars' surface but extended outward into the solar system, then beyond, marking stars and routes he had never seen in any human database. At the top of the display, a new signal strength icon pulsed, showing reach far past anything colony comms could achieve. The alien's gift was clear. His primitive device could now speak to the stars. The first incoming signal arrived moments later. It was not from the alien he'd met. The transmission carried no greeting, only coordinates far beyond Mars' orbit, paired with an image that unfolded across the phone's display. It was Earth, unmistakable in its blues and greens, but surrounded by structures that glinted like a crown of light, massive ships, human-built, in the orbit of a planet that looked both familiar and impossibly advanced. The timestamp on the image was wrong in a way that made his chest tighten. It was centuries ahead of his own time. Then came a voice, clear and deliberate, spoken in unaccented human tones. "We've been waiting for you." The message ended without further explanation, the coordinates remaining on screen as the only trace. He stared at them, the distance between Mars and that point almost incomprehensible, but not impossible, not anymore. He considered the alien's earlier warning, the one he had ignored. Do not answer yet. Whatever this was, it was not a random call. Someone in humanity's future, or perhaps in its outermost reach, had known a human on Mars with an obsolete phone would one day be able to hear them. The idea should have been absurd, but here it was, vibrating steadily in his hand like a promise. The colony would survive now. The oxygen would hold, and his duty here could be considered fulfilled. But the map on the Realme one was no longer content to remain idle, and neither was he. Humans had always moved toward the unknown, not away from it, and this was no different, only larger, deeper, louder in its invitation. He closed his grip around the phone, feeling the faint thrum of the alien alloy within it, the merger of two technologies separated by uncountable years and cultures. Outside, Mars was settling into its usual silence, but somewhere beyond, something had shifted. He knew, with the same clarity that had driven every step into the storm, that this was not the end of survival. This was the beginning of pursuit. The coordinates glowed on the screen, steady and patient, waiting for the moment he would act. And when he finally did, the galaxy would hear the sound of that old ringtone again, this time not as an echo on a dead world, but as the first note in a message humanity was ready to send back.